Hey, welcome to Bible study. I'm so glad you're here. Once again, we've gathered some friends in the conference room at the Allegheny West conference office, and we're going to be taking a look at a section of the book of Nehemiah today. We're going to start in chapter 2 at verse 19 in just a moment. Just a reminder that Nehemiah is history, is biblical history, which is history through God-colored glasses. It's this history of how God uses people, interacts with people to accomplish his purposes in the world. And this was also likely written by the same author as who wrote First and Second Chronicles, also wrote Ezra and Nehemiah. Ezra and Nehemiah were originally one document. They've been divided into two by the early church fathers. It's probably written about 440 AD, which would be about 15, 20 years after the events here. So it's written as a historical record of what happened among God's people. And it was written to capture this very important period of time as a model of how God rebuilds people and nations out of rubble. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here. Last week we went through chapter 1, which was the call of Nehemiah. We learned how Nehemiah was a great listener. He listened to a report that came from Jerusalem. We learned how Nehemiah grieved, not only the report that he heard, but the sin that was behind the report. And then Nehemiah prays, and a huge part of his prayer was confessing his sin and the sin of his people. And then Nehemiah begins to plan, and he asks God to give him favor as he approaches the king. When Nehemiah approaches the king can see that something's changed inside of Nehemiah. His face doesn't look the same. He's downcast. Something's wrong in his heart. And the king asks him, "What's the matter?" And Nehemiah tells him. And the king asks him, "What do you want me to do?" And Nehemiah tells him. Nehemiah asks him to free him to go back and rebuild Jerusalem. The king's willing to do so, but he wants to know how long it's going to take. And so Nehemiah said a period of 12 years. But before he leaves, the king does three amazing things. He gives him letters to get him past all the borders between Susa and Jerusalem, so that none of the Trans-Euphrates governors can charge him tolls as he comes through. The second is he gives him like his Home Depot Platinum card. They can buy all the building supplies he needs to have to get there. And the third thing he does is he equips him. He equips the caravan, but he also sends soldiers with him to protect him along the way. And I also believe to provide protection as he's about to do his work of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. Now, just before the passage we're in now, we learned that Nehemiah has gone through the city at night, inspecting what needs to be done. He hadn't told anybody why he was there. For 3 days. He was just resting. And he goes out at night to inspect the job. And the next day, he goes to the city gate, or what was left of the city gate, and he invites all of the leaders there, the priests, the elders, the officials, and he tells them that God has laid it upon his heart to rebuild the walls. And at the end of that conversation, the Bible tells us that the people said, "Let us start rebuilding." So they began this good work. So they started. Now, verse 19, we started this last time. We find that there's opposition. Just a reminder, anytime we're going to attempt something great for God, we're going to receive opposition. It goes with the territory. That's because the devil doesn't give up ground he's held for a long time without a fight. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try, but just remember there's going to be opposition. It goes with the territory. I've never done anything meaningful for God that I've not gotten slings and arrows. Not once. In fact, if I'm not getting slings of arrows, there's something wrong. I'm not doing what God's asking me to do. In fact, when you start getting opposition like that, it's kind of a backhanded compliment, that the devil wants to pay that much attention to you. Okay, let's just pick up at verse 19 again in chapter 2. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arab heard about this, these were all leaders of these groups of people that lived around Jerusalem that benefited from Jerusalem being broken down. They mocked and ridiculed us. Then they said, "What is this you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king?" So in other words, they're accusing him of insurrection. They're accusing him that he's doing something wrong. They're spreading false news or fake news. I answered them saying, "The God of heaven will give us success." So he gives glory to God. He already has the letters. They've already seen the letters that he's allowed to come here and do this, right? but they're just trying to sway public opinion. They know the truth in private, but they're twisting it in public to try and make him look bad and feel small. He answered them by saying, "The God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding. But as for you," this is like a shot across the bow, "you have no share in Jerusalem, nor any nor any claim or historic right to it." In other words, he's saying, there's a new sheriff in town, and you're not going to run roughshod over these people anymore. We're going to make them defensible. And I imagine as he says it, his Persian soldiers are standing next to him. Because here's how this worked. There are no walls, right? So I kind of envision Sanballat and Geshem and Tobiah. They kind of go up on the Mount of Olives, looking down toward Jerusalem, and they're watching what's happening. And then they get a little closer, and they just start to taunt him. Who is this? Who is this? He thinks he's king. This isn't the first time they're going to taunt. It's the first time they're going to taunt him, but it's not the last time. It's going to continue. So let's go on to chapter 3. Eliashib, the high priest, and his fellow priests went to work and rebuilt the sheep gate. Now, that's the gate. If you were to go to Jerusalem today, that's the gate that you enter into to go to Temple Square. That was the sheep gate. And it was called the sheep gate because that's where they brought all the sheep for sacrifice in the temple. It's also the gate that's closest to Bethlehem, which history tells us is where where the priests had flocks for a lot of the herds that were used at the temple during the time of Jesus. Bethlehem was a place where there were priests that were out in the shepherd field keeping watch over their flock by night. There were special shepherd priests. Yeah, Bob.
Which gate of the many gates do we really feel for sure that Jesus walked through his boy to get in?
Oh, which ones are we sure he walked through? The Jaffa gate, the sheep gate, the he would have had access through the dung gate, the new gate. Well, not the new gate, and probably the Damascus gate. Yeah, but there were several gates. But you remember when we went there, we saw the map at the museum, the Israeli museum, and you can see there are probably a dozen gates around. But the ones most common would have been the sheep gate, or the lion's gate, or because the sheep gate, you would have gone in and gone right up the southern steps to the temple. That's the most common though for Jesus. And actually, that would have been the main gate for the pilgrims, and here's why. Downhill south of the Temple Mount, remember there are those steps there that you can stand on. You can stand on the ancient steps that Jesus would have walked up into where and they have the porticos for the stairwells blocked off. You can stand there, but south of that, you remember they've excavated underneath that Arab neighborhood. They've excavated the city of David. So they have places in the city of David they've marked as the palace. You can see part of Nehemiah's wall. You can walk through Hezekiah's tunnel. We've done part of that. And you go all the way to the pool of Siloam, which they're rebuilding, which should be completed this year. They've excavated the pools of Siloam, and they'll fill it with water. And then that marketplace, remember, they were just excavating it, the walkway back up, which would have been an ancient marketplace. Most of the pilgrims that came to Jerusalem from the north would have crossed the Jordan River, gone down the east side of the Jordan, crossed over at Jericho, walked up through the ancient Jericho road, the Cirque, crested the hill at the Mount of Olives, come down and gone to the south to the Pool of Siloam so they could ritually wash before they walked up the steps to the temple. So most of the time Jesus would have gone to the temple, it would have been the sheep gate, the southern entrance. That's not the entrance he was taken out to be crucified, but that's the entrance that he entered most of the time. Good question. Okay, Eliashib, the high priest, and his fellow priests went to work and rebuilt the sheep gate. They dedicated it and set its doors in place. Isn't that interesting? The priests got right about the work, and they not only finished, they dedicated it because it was a sacred gate through which the sacrifices come, and they set its doors in place, building as far as the Tower of the 100, which they dedicated as far as the Tower of Hananel. The men of Jericho built the adjoining section, as Zakur, the son of Imri, built next to them. So it's interesting, they're naming all these people. The fish gate was rebuilt by the sons of Hassanah, and they laid its beams and put its doors and bolts and bars in place. In other words, they built the gate, they put the beams in place, but they didn't have the doors done. They didn't have everything done. Oh no, they put its doors in place. So they finished those doors. Merimoth, the son of Uriah, the son of Hakoz, repaired the next section. Next to him, Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, the son of Meshabzabel, made repairs. And next to him, Zadok, which, by the way, Zadok means righteous. Zadok, the son of Bana, made many repairs, or also made repairs. The next section was repaired by the men of Tekoa, but their nobles would not put their shoulder to the work under their supervision. So let me just say something about this. To this point, everybody's working. Why would they not work?
Can I take a wild guess?
Sure.
Probably for the same reason a lot of churches look at the pastor. Well, the pastor's the one running everything. So
Right.
why doesn't he plan that? But the real work is the congregation. The real work is the people, because it's their place.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it. I think that's from the workers' perspective. It might not have seemed strange to the workers, but everybody else was doing the work. So these elders, these leaders, sat out, and that's because they thought it was somebody else's job. And listen, when life's in the rubble and everything's falling down around you and everything's a mess, it is all hands on deck. Nobody gets a pass. Everybody is doing the hard work. Now, there are supervisors, and you have to have order to the work you're doing, but that was Nehemiah. But I find it interesting. They're just going step by step, wall by wall, naming different sections, meaning that every family or household was taking responsibility about the part of the wall that was closest to them, which means they had a vested interest. The priests fixed the fish or the sheep gate. They had a vested interest to get that back because that would be the entrance to the temple. They had vested interest to get this work done. Yeah, let me see if there's anything in my footnote that says anything. So Tekoa is about 6 miles south of Bethlehem, 11 miles from Jerusalem. Another reason they might not have participated is because they didn't live in Jerusalem. So you see that. The next section was prepared by the men of Tekoa, but their nobles would not actually, it doesn't say did not, it says would not. So they made a choice not to put their shoulders to the work under their supervisors. In other words, they were too good to do this work. By the way, if you're a leader, that's a very dangerous place to be. One of the things I learned early on as a pastor, there are 2 or 3 rules when it comes to cover dish dinners. You want to know what rule number 1 is? Pastors go last. They go last. Now, let me tell you a secret. That means you get your seconds first, but it also means the chicken may be gone. Pastors go last. The second thing is pastors wait tables. I mean, there wasn't a dinner that took place like that I wasn't pouring coffee or going table to table or helping clean a table. And the reason is that you're set apart. You're set apart as a pastor, but you're really the lead servant. You got to get your hands dirty. And I will tell you, the bigger the setting, the more challenging that can be. But and the third thing is you always stop by in the kitchen to thank the help. I mean, there's some people that were in the room earlier that sometimes volunteer in the kitchen, and there wasn't a time that there was a meal that I didn't go in the kitchen and thank everybody, because it wouldn't happen without them, right? I'm doing my thing, but it wouldn't happen without them doing their thing. But so if you're a leader, you're never too good to get your hands dirty. Now, the other thing I would say is don't waste your leadership. Exercise your leadership by being a lead servant, and but you got to be involved. It just goes with the territory. All right, let me jump back here. I could go a long time about that. The Jeshana gate was repaired by Joiada, son of Paziah. Aren't you glad I'm reading this and you aren't? And Meshullam, the son of Bezadiah. Now, by the way, it'd be an interesting exercise if you have Hebrew. Anybody has Hebrew, to go through and kind of line out the meaning of all these names. I didn't have time to do that, but it'd be interesting because I would imagine that the majority of them are still reflective of their faith identity. Um, um, they laid its beams and put its doors and bolts and bars in place. Next to them, repairs were made by men from Gibeon and Mizpah, Melatiah of Gibeon and Jedon of Maranoth, places under the authority of the governor of Trans-Euphrates. In other words, people were coming from other places to help build this. So they're, Trans-Euphrates, across Euphrates. So they were coming. These were Jews in exile. The word was beginning to spread that Nehemiah was rebuilding the walls. Now, they didn't have telephone, they didn't have telegraph, they didn't have television, but they did have telecaravan. And the caravans were talking about what was going on, and the word began to spread, and people said, I want to have a part of that. Uzziel, the son of Harhiah, one of the goldsmiths, repaired the next section. Interesting, a goldsmith repairing a brick wall. It's been a long time since he's worked with stone, if you're working with gold. And Hananiah, one of the perfume makers, made repairs next to that. They restored Jerusalem as far as the broad wall. By the way, they've rediscovered the broad wall. If you go to Jerusalem today, under the new section, the Jewish quarter, they actually have a section of it where that you can walk. They've built bridges across the ruins of the broad wall. They kept it open so you can see that it historically was accurate, that it existed. Rephaiah, the son of Hur, ruler of the half district of Jerusalem, repaired the next section. Interesting, ruler. So, adjoining his, Jediah, the son of Harumaph, made repairs opposite his house. Hattush, the son of Hashabneiah, made repairs next to him. Machijah, son of Harim, and Hashub, the son of Pahath Moab, repaired another section of the Tower of Ovens. Now, interesting, Moab is not a Jewish name. So this is a person who's settled in Jerusalem from a different place. Moab is across the river, is a different ethnicity, but this has become his home, and he's helping to rebuild the city as well. The psalmist says that you should always take interest in and pray for the success of the city you live in. Pray for the success of the nation you live in. That's the same principle here. They repaired another section in the Tower of the Ovens. Shallum, the son of Helohesh, the ruler of the half district of Jerusalem, so this is the other ruler, repaired the next section with the help of his daughters. Girls are doing the work. First time this is mentioned. The Valley Gate was repaired by Hanun and the residents of Zanoah. They rebuilt it and put its doors and bolts and bars in place. They also repaired 500 yards of the wall as far as the Dung Gate, which, by the way, that's the trash gate. And if you were to go to Jerusalem today, this would be on the southwest side in the valley of Gehenna, not Gehenna, Ohio, not Gehenna, Gehenna. And it was the dump of Jerusalem. And at the time of Christ, it's where they would also throw bodies of people that were not buried. And it was always smoldering, it was always burning. And so one of the allusions in the New Testament is Gehenna is hell. It's like that. So they So the Valley Gate was repaired by Hanun, the residences of Noah. They rebuilt it and put its doors and bolts and bars in place. They also repaired 500 yards all the way to the Dung Gate. Verse 14, the Dung Gate was repaired by Melchijah, the son of Rechab, the ruler of the district of Beth Hakaram. He built it and put its doors and bolts and bars in place. The Fountain Gate was repaired by Shalun, the son of Kolheza, the ruler of the district of Mizpah. So these are regions around Jerusalem now. He rebuilt it, roofing it over and putting its doors and bolts and bars in place. He also repaired the wall of the pool of Siloam by the king's garden as far as the steps going down from the city of David. Now, some of you have seen those steps. Beyond him, Nehemiah, the son of Abzuk, the ruler of a half district of Ben Zur, made repairs to a point opposite the tombs of David. This is the east side now. Opposite of David, as far as the artificial pool of the house of the heroes, which was David's mighty men. Those were the heroes. Next to him, the repairs were made by the Levites. Once again, we're getting close to the Temple Mount again, under Rehum, the son of Bani. By the way, the Temple Mount as we know it today didn't exist then. That was built later by Saul, but the temple was located in the same area. Let's see. Verse 18, next to him, the repairs were made by the countrymen under Benui, the son of Henadad, the ruler of the other half district of Keilah. Next to him, Ezer, the son of Jeshua. By the way, the name Ezer means helpmate. That's the Hebrew word for helper. The son of Jeshua, the ruler of Mizpah, repaired another section from a point facing the ascent of the armory as far as the angle. Next to him, Baruch, the son of Zabai, zealously repaired another section from the angle to the entrance of the house of Eliashib, the high priest. And next to him, Meremoth, son of Uriah, the son of Hakaz, repaired another section from the entrance of Eliashib's house to the end of it. The repairs next to him were made by the priests from the surrounding region. Beyond them, Benjamin and Hashib, and the repairs to the front of their house. And next to him, Azariah, the son of Messiah, the son of Ananiah, made repairs beside his house, and next to him, Benui, the son of Henadad, repaired another section from Azariah's house to the angle and the corner, and Palal, the son of Uzai, worked opposite the angle and the tower protecting from the upper palace near the court of the guard. Next to him, Pedaiah, the son of Parash, the temple servants living on the hill of Ophel made repairs up to the point opposite the water gate toward the east and protecting tower. And next to them, the men of Tekoa repaired another section from the great projecting tower to the wall of Ophel. Now it's interesting. Tekoa is like 13 miles south of Jerusalem. They built on the south end. Now they're building a section on the north end. So they're building on both sides. We're almost done with this, I promise. Above the horse gate, the priest made repairs, each in front of his own house. Next to him, Zadok, the son of Emer, made repairs opposite his house. Next to him, Shammai, the son of Zechariah, the guard at the east gate, made repairs. Next to him, Hananiah, the son of Shelemiah, and Hanun, the sixth son of Zalaph, repaired another section. And next to them, Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, made repairs opposite his living quarters. And next to him, Malchijah, one of the goldsmiths, made repairs as far as the house of the temple servants and the merchants opposite the inspection gate, and as far as the room above the corner. And between the room above the corner and the sheep gate, the goldsmiths and merchants made repairs. Whew. Why is that in there? What's that? It's a detailed account. They're naming names. The people who would have read this the first time would have known them. This would have been almost a half a generation later. And some of the younger folks in this were now the older folks. Some of the other people that were in this were now gone. It was their heritage. I think what was a common phrase heard in most of the sections of the wall? Near their own homes. So they had a vested interest. The priests had a vested interest in building around the temple. Other people had vested interest in building around their homes. Different people had vested interest in secure gates. They were working with their passions, right? And it was an all hands on deck. So, you know, nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. And if everybody does something, then everything will get done. And this was a Herculean task. Now think about this. Those walls have been lying in rubble for 120 years. Thistles, thorns, jackals, snakes, scorpions, vines, trees, everything had grown up into that area. So it's not just finding the rocks again, it's getting rid of all that junk. It's a big job. And it took everybody. Now there's only one group of people, the people from Tekoa, whose elders didn't help, but they built in two different places. It was almost as if the people were trying to make up for the slacking of the elders. So they're working. This is like an immense, all hands on deck public service project. Beth and I just got back from a week at Glacier National Park with our daughter and her family. And if you've ever been to Glacier, it's amazing. If you've never been to Glacier, it's amazing. If you want to see wild animals, go to Yellowstone. But if you want to see majesty and splendor, go to Glacier. It's almost like God took 5 different sets of mountains and pushed them together so they go straight up. But there's one road that goes from the east side to the west side, and it's called the Going to the Sun Road. It's about 45 miles long. The first 25 miles are uphill, and about 10 miles of that is like going up the face of this mountain. And it was built during the 1930s during as a part of the New Deal. It was a public works project, and it was built by thousands of people because they couldn't get work anywhere else, and because it was important to get it done. I imagine that while that didn't take as long to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, it was kind of like a public works project. When the leaders in the gate said, "We're going to do this," every other priority went to the side, and this became the priority. There was nothing else that was more important than rebuilding and resecuring the city. So it was all hands on deck. Any other thoughts about why this is included?
Well, it certainly showed the support, once it began,
Mm-hmm.
everybody was on board because God was doing this.
Right. So it was everybody was supportive. Anybody else? It's like a written thank you. Yeah. How many of you have ever gone to a church building and seen a plaque there that has a list of the people who helped make that happen? Right? It's a memory. It's a memory. And it's also an inspiration that there are people who came before that this was important to. This should be important to you too. All right. Now let's go to verse 4 or chapter 4. When Sanballat, meaning number 1, heard that they were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. So he's gone from taunting and making fun of them to now he's angry. He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria. Now get this. So he's ridiculing the Jews. Where's he doing this? Well, let me tell you, the topography of Jerusalem is very interesting. Every time Jerusalem has been attacked, it's come from the east because those are the higher mountains, Mount Scopus and the Mount of Olives. And so I imagine that Samaria is to the north. I imagine that Sanballat hears this is happening, and he marshals his army, and he goes down. He's standing on the Mount of Olives. He's incensed. He's angry. So the first time it was Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem just standing in the valley, the Kidron Valley, taunting them what they were going to do at the gate. But this time he's brought reinforcements. So he says he's saying this in the presence of his associates, which would be Sanballat and Geshem, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, and the army of Samaria. And he said, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are? By the way, this is opposition by mockery, in case you don't recognize it. Now, another way of saying this is sarcasm. And I understand sarcasm. I'm from Pittsburgh. Sarcasm is my native tongue. I get this. But sarcasm is also a sign of weakness. He's trying to put them down. Tobiah, the Ammonite, who's from that direction as well, who was at his side, said, "What are they building? If even a fox climbed on it, he would break down their wall of stones." So they're taunting them. Now, this is a much more educated crowd than I normally speak with, but I know none of you have probably seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail. But he reminds me of that guy on the wall saying, "Come back and I'll taunt you again." You know, they're just taunting him. Now they're doing it from they're kind of like rough. They're rattling sabers. They got their army behind them. It's kind of like when somebody comes to visit and you make a flyover. You just want to show who's in charge. We saw this happen this last week in Britain, right? We've seen it happen in the United States. We want you to know who's in charge here. Who's in charge. So he's got his army there. He's rattling sabers. They're taunting. What does Nehemiah do? For the third time, he prays. Hear us, O our God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders. So he asked God to act. Nehemiah's not going to fight this anymore. I'm done. And I will just tell you, there comes a time where I had an experience this last week where I was asked to make a decision. I made a decision. The person didn't agree with the decision. Wrote me a twice as long email telling me he didn't agree with the decision. I said, "Noted, the decision stands." Sent me another email twice as long. And I just finally figured I'm not going to cast any more pearls. And I'm done. And Nehemiah, I love the fact that he doesn't engage them. Because how do you engage mockery? How do you engage sarcasm? Usually with the same. So he basically calls on God to deal with them. Now, the Bible says, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay." That's what God says. So how long does it take? It's not your job to decide when. You put it in God's hands, let God deal with it. Let God deal with it. That's what he does. So, verse 6, we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart. So, half height. How tall do you think that needs to be? Probably 8 to 10 feet. Probably 8 to 10 feet. Yeah. But once again, here's the contrast. When Sanballat, Tobiah, and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the men of Ashdod, the crowd's growing now. Okay, so you got Tobias to the east, the Arabs are to the southeast, Sanballat's to the north, the Ammonites are to the east, Ashdod is to the west. These are the Philistines. When the men of Ashdod heard that the repairs to Jerusalem walls had gone ahead and the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. So they plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. So this is opposition by conspiracy. So you have opposition by mockery. We're just going to, we're going to make fun of them and ignore them. We're going to rattle our sabers. Now it's conspiracy. But what does he do? For the fourth time, he prays. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet the threat. Now, I want to remind you, not only did he post a guard of the people of Israel, but who did Nehemiah bring with him? He brought soldiers from Persia. So he's putting Persian guards on the walls, which what does that mean to these small groups of people around that are a part of the Persian Empire? They're being represented by the king, and if you attack this with these guards here, you're fighting Susa. Pretty smart. So they prayed, but then they took action. So here's the other thing. I believe in prayer. I'm 100% in favor of prayer. But God gave you gray matter between your ears to plan and do things, right? So you not only pray, you have to plan. You have to act. You have to do your part, And so he does his part. He prays, God protect us, and then he says, we're gonna post a guard around the wall. Meanwhile, verse 10, the people of Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out, and there's so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. Also, our enemies said, before they know it or see it, we will be right there among them and we'll kill them and put an end to the work. So this is the rubble outside the wall, right? This is outside, and this is opposition by defeatism. Okay? This is bewildering people. Saying the job's too big, we can't do it, we're tired, it's too dangerous, it's too risky, we can't do this. And so this is the people outside the wall. By the way, this is you know what? There's an old story that talks about Satan's fire sale. He's selling off some of his tools. You know what the most worn tool was? Discouragement. Discouragement. He's basically they're getting discouraged. Now, this is hard. I mean, they don't have Caterpillar high lifts. All they have is hands and feet and block and tackle. That's what they've got. And they probably are cutting. They're probably cutting the trees and stuff out with flint axes. It's hard work. I mean, this is not easy. So then the Jews, those living inside who lived near them, came and told us 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack us. So they now have people inside. So you've had opposition by mockery, you've had opposition by conspiracy, and now you've got opposition by defeatism. And it's not only the people outside, it's people inside Jerusalem that are scared. Therefore, I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places. Get this part, posting them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. After I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Now, so what does Nehemiah do? He's already prayed. He basically arms everybody at the most vulnerable space, and he puts them with the people they love the most. Let me tell you, I'll fight for a lot of people, but the ones that I fight for the most are my wife and my kids and grandkids. I'll die for them, right? So he's putting them in the position. He's strategically placing them where they need to be. He's strategically placing them with the people they'll defend, right? He's doing something pretty wise here. And then he says, remember the Lord. Remember, God's called us to do this. So here's the other thing. The call of God, when you know you're doing something God's called you to do, you'll do. I mean, it gives you great courage. It doesn't mean you won't get slings and arrows. It doesn't mean there won't be opposition. It doesn't mean it will be easy. But if you know in your knower that you know that you're doing what God has called you to do, you'll fight. But you got to remember the faithfulness of God. Last year I preached a sermon entitled "Responding to the Calls of God," and what I was talking about was living vocationally. And a vocation is not a job. A vocation is a calling. And if you want to live vocationally, the best place to live is where your life and God's will intersect for maximum impact. That's living vocationally. Nehemiah is living vocationally. He is called to Jerusalem for this task. He has challenged the people. They've responded to that. They are doing what they're called to do at that time. It's not without danger. It's not without opposition. But at a crucial point, he's telling them, remember the Lord. In other words, remember God has put us here. Remember, this is the job, and then defend yourself. Does that make sense? Now, when our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot and God had frustrated it, we all returned to the wall, each to his own work. So, in other words, when they're talking about this rumor that we're going to attack them and they're plotting together, as soon as they display guards on the walls and people ready to defend, they walked away. They didn't want to fight. They walked away. They thought that Jerusalem was going to act the way it has for 120 years and say, oh, by the way, come and take whatever you want. But this is a different Jerusalem. They're developing their spiritual backbone again. From that day on, half of my men did the work, while the other half were equipped with spears, shields, bows, and armor. The officers posted themselves behind all the people of Judah. In other words, the officers, these are the Persians, posted themselves behind all the people of Judah who are rebuilding the wall. Those who carried materials did their work with one hand and held a weapon with the other. And each of the workers bore a sword at his side as he worked. But the man who sounded the trumpet stayed with me. Now, why that? Because Nehemiah was probably at the highest point. He was watching the progress all around him, but he was also watching the horizon. And the trumpet blast was the warning that everybody was a call to arms. Now, I just want you to get this sequence. The sequence here is the army is placed, trust God, his servants are helping, they're all carrying weapons, they're ready for an alarm, they're ready for something that happens at night. They're constantly vigilant. They're constantly ready. Verse 19. Then I said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, the work is extensive and spread out, and we are widely separated from each other along the wall. Wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us there. Our God will fight for us. When I read this passage, I remember this scene from the movie We Were Soldiers. We Were Soldiers is based upon a book, which is better than the movie, by the way. But it's a Mel Gibson movie about the first land battle between U.S. Army cavalry and North Vietnamese regulars in the Vietnam War. And it takes place in the Ia Drang Valley. It took place over a couple days, and the U.S. troops were vastly outnumbered, like 20-1, and they ended up winning the battle. But the reason they ended up winning the battle is because Colonel Hal Moore, who was the commander, played by Mel Gibson, kept repositioning troops based upon call, and they would reinforce the line where they needed to strategically at every point. And it was all about you understanding the strategy of moving to where the fight is. Now that takes instinct, because our instinct is to run away from the fight. I mean, it takes will. It takes will to do that, because the instinct is to run away from the fight, but to run toward it is very important. And so I just want to say, spiritual leaders, if you're leading an organization or a church or something, and you're in something that you're trying to take back spiritual ground, Nehemiah has a lot to teach us here. Involve as many people as possible. Make sure that you're rooted in prayer. Make sure you understand what you're about and what the goal is, and stay focused on task, and be willing to realign your reinforcements when you need to get the job done. It can happen. He teaches us a lot here. Verse 21. So we continued to work with half the men holding spears from the first light of dawn until the stars came out. At that time, I also said to the people, have every man and his helper stay inside Jerusalem at night, so they can serve us as guards by night and workmen by day. In other words, come on back in. You're safer in here than staying outside. Besides that, we can help defend each other. Neither I nor my brothers, nor my men, nor the guards with me took off our clothes. Each had his weapon, even when we went for water. In other words, they were on guard. They didn't take time for anything else other than protecting the people.
It's like the buddy system.
It is. It is very much so. Very much like the buddy system. Um, and 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 as I look back over 40 years of ministry, um, where I have dealt with resistance the best, I've modeled or I've done a lot of the best of what Nehemiah has done. Shared work, shared responsibility, common vision, reinforcement when necessary. And when I've gotten in trouble, it's when I've forgotten that I have to involve everybody else. And when I've forgotten to take the time to cast the vision for everybody else. And, you learn some things over time, and there's some mistakes you don't make twice. And I think God gave us the book of Nehemiah for many reasons, but one of them is to show us how we can get it right the first time and not have to learn from our mistakes. Well, let's go on for these next few minutes in chapter 5. We'll at least get started today. Now, the men and their wives raised a great outcry against their Jewish brothers. Now, interesting. There's all kinds of people, but they're arguing with one another. Okay? Some were saying, we and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain. Others were saying, we are mortgaging our fields and our vineyards and our homes to get grain grain during the famine. Now, let me just explain the problem here. They've been so busy building, they're not taking care of the crops. And because they haven't been able to take care of the crops, they have to buy it. They have to buy resources from other people. And some of the Jews were charging them interest they're leveraging their property, which they're never supposed to do. That's against the law, against God's law. And still others were saying, we've had to borrow money to pay the king's tax on our fields and vineyards, although they are the same flesh and blood as our countrymen, and though our sons are as good as theirs, yet we have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. In other words, they were selling their kids. They were doing all this other stuff to make ends meet because God's people had been living outside of God's will for so long, they'd begun to pick up pagan practices. So they were mortgaging their property, they were selling their kids into slavery, they were doing whatever they could do to make ends meet, and they were doing it to one another. That's the hard thing. Jews were extorting Jews, which, by the way, if you read the Old Testament law, they weren't supposed to loan money for interest to one another. They weren't supposed to do that kind of thing. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but we are powerless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others. So they loaned everything out. When I heard, this is Nehemiah, this is the governor, when I heard their outcry and these charges, I was very angry. Now, why is he angry? They're not living according to the law. Yeah, one of my footnotes says here, it's estimated, for verse 5, it says, in times of economic distress, families would borrow funds using family members as collateral. If a man could not pay the loan and its interest, his children, his wife, or even the man himself could be sold into bondage. An Israelite who fell into debt, however, could serve his creditor as a hired worker. He was to be released in the 7th year unless he chose to stay voluntarily. During the 7th year famine in Egypt, Joseph was approached by people to ask him to accept their land and their bodies in exchange for food. The irony for the Israelites is that at least as the exiles of Mesopotamia, their families were together, but now, because of their dire economic necessity, their children were being sold into slavery in Persia. So it was bad. So, by the way, I have a person that used to attend the church that I was pastoring who's since moved, but we found out that we were distant relatives, like cousins 3 times removed, but that we shared the same great grandparents. And he went and got me the the ancestral genealogical record of my entire mom's side of the family from when they first came into America. And they came in as indentured servants in Goochland County, Virginia. And the first generation never received their freedom. And but in the generation of my grandmother and great grandmother, they often gave children away because they couldn't afford them during the Depression. They were raised by other people. They were given to other people as farm help. So very similar, very difficult decisions being made in the face of economic hardship. But when Nehemiah hears this, he's angry. And he says, verse 7, I pondered them in my mind and then accused the nobles and officials. I told them, you are exacting usury from your own countrymen. You're charging interest to them. So I called together a large meeting to deal with them and said, as far as possible, we have bought back our Jewish brothers who were sold to the Gentiles. Now you are selling your brothers only for them to be sold back to us. They kept quiet because they could find nothing to say. You know what that's code for? They were defenseless. They were guilty. So I continued. What you are doing is not right. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of God and avoid the reproach of our Gentile enemies? I and my brothers and my men are also lending people money and grain, but let the exacting of usury stop. In other words, you can lend them this, but you're not charging them interest. You're not taking their children. You're not doing anything like that. Give back to them immediately their fields, vineyards, olive groves, houses, and also the usury you are charging them, the 100th part of money grain, new oil, new wine and oil. In other words, Nehemiah, the governor, he's the most powerful person, right? And I mean, what's the use using power for good if you don't if using power if you don't use it for good, right? So he's basically said, this game is up. You're out of business. You're paying it all back, including what you made. Their response is classic. We will give it back, and we will not demand anything more from them. We will do as you say. Now, is that the way that always works for you? What do you think's going on that they're willing to give up the fight so easy?
I don't think they want to go against God.
They don't want to go against God. And for the first time in 120 years, somebody has shown up representing God. Now, Zerubbabel rebuilt a temple. That was great. Ezra restored the law. That was great. But they still weren't secure. Somebody's shown up to secure the city where God has said he would rest his name, his presence would be there. And for the first time, somebody's acting in their defense, and he's speaking with authority. And so they're going to listen to him. That, and he has Persian soldiers with him. Get this part. Then I summoned the priests and made the nobles and the officials take an oath to do what they'd promised. So in other words, it's not just good enough that you promised this to the government. That's who Nehemiah is. I want you to make a covenant with God. So he sacramentalized it. I also shook out the folds of my robe and said, in this way, may God shake out his house and possessions, and out his house and possessions, every man who does not keep this promise. So may such a man be shaken out and emptied. This was actually a symbol of getting rid of something. If you shook out your robes, you, like any grain that you might have had hidden, you just got rid of it. You distance yourself from it. To shake out the hem of your garment meant to take off the sandals and dust them off. I have nothing to do with you. So in other words, if you break the covenant you've made with God on this matter, if you break the promise you've made with me on this matter, may God do with you what I've just done to my ropes. Shake them off and be done. At this, the whole assembly said amen and praised the Lord. and people did as they promised. So this is the first real internal crisis. Everything else has been external. The opposition by mockery, the opposition by plotting, the strife over fear and disillusionment. That's all been mostly caused externally, but this was an internal conflict. And this was really important. And it's really important that the leader took up the cause of the oppressed. It would have been very tempting for him to say, you know what, I'm the governor of the king of Persia. I get a share of all that. That's not what he did. Because part of what they were struggling under was they were borrowing money to pay the tax. And he basically is giving everybody a pass until they can get things right again and get it back in their possession. Then he'll exact the tax again. But he's acting on behalf of the poor. He's using his power to give them back what is rightfully theirs and give them the opportunity to be citizens and not slaves. He's restoring dignity to them. Um, you know, um, Beth and I have 3 adult children, and we love each one of them just immensely. And but when you become the parent of an adult child, you move from being an authority to an advisor, right? And when you're an advisor, you have to be invited to give your opinion, and it's an opinion. It's not always listened to. But it's been interesting to watch my adult children try to figure out their parenting voice, you know, because you can't just say, if you do that, I'm going to ground you for life. You have to give a kid a path to kind of navigate their way back. And what Nehemiah did here is wisdom. He gave a path for the people to do the right thing so that everybody could benefit. He wasn't just going to punish them. He gave them the opportunity to do the right thing. Now, if they didn't do the right thing, there would have been judgment, but they were able to do the right thing. You have to give people a path to do the right thing when you're trying to hold them accountable. Well, I think we're going to stop here. I mean, we're going to pick up right at that same spot, Nehemiah chapter 5, beginning about verse, let's see, about 13 or 14, when we come back the next time. I hope you're enjoying this. I just want to remind you that chapter 4 is there to remind us that anybody who does anything of significance in the kingdom is remembered by God. I sometimes get the genealogy passages and I just want to fly over them. I just want to, they call those the flyover chapters. But you know what? If you sit down with a good Bible dictionary and you take a look at the meaning of the names, and there will be throwaway sentences in each of those genealogies. If you go for the story behind the sentence, that has incredible depth and richness. And a good exercise would be to do that with that chapter I think it's chapter 3, where all the names are listed. Just take the time to go back through that with your concordance or with a Bible dictionary, and just take a look at all the intricacies of that particular chapter. I think it'll be helpful. And then, of course, chapter 4 and the beginning of chapter 5 is how do you deal with opposition, mockery, organized, behind the scenes. By the way, we're not done dealing with the meanies. Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem, and the rest of them are all going to come back again several times. And his first weapon is always prayer. Let's pray. Lord, thank you. Thank you for the gift of prayer, that you are always more willing to answer than we are sometimes willing to ask. So whatever the conflict, whatever the challenge, whatever the ground that we're trying to take back in our individual lives right now, Lord, we pray to you and we ask that you give us favor, you give us courage, and you give us grace for the living of these days. Lord, we pray your blessing to be upon us. Help us to lead like Nehemiah from our knees. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you, folks. Thanks for coming to Bible study. I'll see you soon.